Can a girl who scrubs floors solve a problem that 50 engineers failed to fix in 10 years? That's what ran through every mind at the Apex Engineering Lab the day she walked past the glass wall. Not to fix anything, not to inspect, just to clean. Her name was Zariah Bennett, and on the surface, she looked like every other janitorial worker the company employed. Blue uniform, rubber gloves, a rag in one hand, and a quiet, unbothered expression that made her presence seem invisible. But that's where the assumptions began, and where the truth would later devastate an entire industry. Zariah was 23, daughter of the company's retired janitor, Marcellus Bennett, who had suffered a near-fatal heart attack the year before. After that, Zariah took over his duties, not out of necessity alone, but out of gratitude. It was her way of honoring the man who raised her, taught her integrity, and more importantly, taught her how to listen. Not to people, but to machines. But inside Apex's high-tech lab, where walls gleamed and diplomas lined the corridors like hunting trophies, Zariah was just the cleaner, a utility, a disposable ghost, and the wolves could smell that. "Hey, princess, maybe clean properly this time?" Elliot Granger, a loudmouth mid-level engineer, called out, smirking as he adjusted his tie like it gave him moral superiority. "Or is your father as sloppy as you are?" The engineers laughed. Cameron Doss, the senior systems supervisor, didn't even bother to hide his scorn. "She probably thinks that engine's a dishwasher," he said, motioning toward the centerpiece of the room, an enormous jet-black 10LD prototype engine. 10 years. $50 million. Still dead. Zariah said nothing, just quietly kept cleaning. That engine, it had sat dormant like a failed god, worshipped by incompetent followers who never dared admit they didn't understand it. It was their shame, their failure. But instead of fixing it, they mocked those who even looked at it with interest. She wasn't looking to impress anyone. She was just listening, observing, studying. Every glance, every whisper, every arrogant sigh from an engineer who had tried and failed was like a breadcrumb in a trail she was silently building. But their taunts grew louder. "You think she knows what a piston is?" Granger said loudly, recording her with his phone. "Let's make this go viral. Janitor's daughter discovers the meaning of the word wrench." The room roared. Phones were out. Laughter echoed. And Zariah stayed silent. "I want to pause here for a moment. Let's be honest. We've all seen something like this before, haven't we? Maybe not in a lab. Maybe in school, in the office, in society. Someone underestimated, dismissed, mocked, simply because they didn't look the part. And deep down, most of us root for that person. Not just because we want to see justice, but because we want to believe that one day being overlooked won't stop us from being brilliant. This story, it's exactly that. Let's go on. Later that week, a memo circulated about Zariah. Human Resources flagged her for suspicious behavior near restricted equipment. Code for, she was seen near the engine, not touching it, just looking. Even that was too much. "She's trying to act smart," muttered Avery Lang, one of the lab analysts. "You know how some of them get." Them, not engineers, not janitors, something else. Zariah came home every night sore in body and exhausted in spirit. Her small apartment was cluttered with books, tools, and her late grandfather's handwritten notebooks. The man had been a diesel mechanic for 40 years and taught her more before she turned 12 than these Apex engineers had learned in 4 degrees. "Engines don't lie," he always told her. "People do." That phrase played in her mind every night, like a song, like a war drum. The mockery didn't stop. Engineers tossed paper on the floor for her to pick up. Granger called her the wrench princess. They joked about giving her a mop engraved with Chief Technical Officer. One even asked sarcastically if she'd like to teach the next orientation class on how to screw in a light bulb. And then came the challenge. It was Thursday. "Yo, let's test our little engineer," Cameron Doss said, smirking as he pointed to the engine like it was a joke exhibit in a museum. "Bet she doesn't know the fuel injector from a shoelace." Granger threw in, $50 she can't name 3 parts. Zariah looked up for the first time. Her voice was calm, clear. 6-cylinder inline pistons, dual intake valves, electronic fuel injection system. Faulty pressure sensor on line 3. The room went silent. You could hear a pen drop. Doss blinked. Beginner's luck, he muttered, clearly rattled. Memorize something off YouTube. The laughter didn't return this time, and something changed in their eyes. It wasn't just mockery now, it was fear. That kind of sick, pride-wounded fear that creeps in when the foundation of your arrogance starts to crack. That's when they upped the ante. Okay, genius, Granger said the next day. You think you're so smart? Tell us what's wrong with the engine. You fix that, 100 from every one of us. You fail, you never step into this lab again. They thought it was a trap, a way to humiliate her once and for all. But Zariah wasn't afraid. I accept, she said. Now this is where it gets good, because just as everyone was prepping to witness her fall flat on her face, someone walked in that changed everything. Nathaniel Rhodes, a retired engineer. A legend. The man behind 3 of the nation's most advanced aerospace engines. Mind if I watch? He asked, startling the room into silence. Mr. Rhodes, Doss stammered. It's just a joke. A harmless little... Not for me, Rhodes replied sharply. Then to Zariah. Your last name is Bennett. You related to Marcellus Bennett? Yes, sir, she said quietly. He smiled. That man once fixed a 1948 radial engine with his bare hands and taught me more about diagnostics than MIT ever did. If you're his granddaughter, I'm listening. At that moment, the room knew this wasn't going to be funny anymore. And Zariah? She turned toward the engine like it had been waiting for her. The lab fell into a strange, weighty silence, the kind that happens just before a storm. All eyes were on Zariah Bennett, who stood in front of the $50 million machine as though it were an old friend instead of a mechanical monster. Just behind her stood Nathaniel Rhodes, the engineering legend who had just stunned the Apex staff with his declaration. If you're half as talented as your grandfather, these boys are about to learn a lesson. The challenge was no longer a joke. This was a test, and no one dared laugh now. Zariah didn't speak right away. Instead, she placed her hand gently on the metal casing, as if greeting it. Then she closed her eyes. You could see the discomfort in the engineers' faces. Grown men who had mocked her for months now reduced to restless silence. They fidgeted with pens, exchanged nervous glances, coughed unnecessarily. But Zariah, she was listening, literally. I used to do this with my grandfather, she said softly. He told me engines speak in vibrations, in rhythms, like heartbeats. She moved around the engine slowly, her fingers brushing across seemingly random parts, and then she stopped. Here, she said, tapping a seemingly unimportant panel. There's a vibration, barely noticeable, but it's inconsistent. You only feel it when everything else is quiet. Nathaniel Rhodes stepped forward. Where exactly? She pointed again. Secondary cooling system. It's clogged. He raised his eyebrows, crouched beside her, and placed his hand in the same spot. Seconds passed. Then he stood up, looked at the crowd of engineers, and said simply, She's right. You could feel the tension snap like a wire under pressure. But that's not the only issue, Zariah continued. Your sensors only monitor the primary cooling line. The engine overheats internally, but none of your diagnostics would ever detect it. Murmurs rippled through the room. Even Cameron Doss, previously smug and relaxed, now looked as if someone had just pulled the ground from under him. Problem 2, Zariah said, walking over to the top of the engine. You're calibrated for sea level pressure. She looked up, eyes piercing. But we're 600 meters above sea level. The pressure valve is misconfigured. The engine's internal combustion is firing unevenly. Rhodes blinked, then chuckled. Of course. God, how did we miss that? The embarrassment on the engineers' faces deepened. You could tell some of them wanted to disappear through the floor. But Zariah wasn't finished. She walked to the side of the engine and tapped the control panel. Problem 3, she said, and it's the most ironic. The room held its collective breath. You installed a state-of-the-art monitoring system, but you never calibrated it to the specific specs of this engine model. All of your readings have been wrong for 10 years. You weren't diagnosing this engine. You were diagnosing the engine you thought it was. Dead silence. Even the loudest mouths in the room, Elliot Granger, Bradley Chen, Avery Lang, stood motionless. their smirks gone, replaced by disbelief. "You're lying," Chen muttered. "We've had consultants, engineers from MIT. You think you're smarter than them?" Zariah tilted her head. "I don't think I'm smarter. I just think I listened harder." Let's pause. You know what I love about this part? It's not just the technical takedown. It's not just that Zariah, this underestimated black woman, just tore down the ivory tower with precision and dignity. It's the fear on their faces. Because for the first time in their careers, these men were being evaluated and found lacking. "Can you prove it?" Doss asked weakly. Zariah turned to Rhodes. "Will you help me monitor the readings while I recalibrate the system?" He smiled. "It would be my honor, Miss Bennett." Over the next 20 minutes, she worked like a surgeon. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. She moved through diagnostics, cables, manual inputs, explaining each step with clarity while Rhodes confirmed the readings. "Pressure normalizing," he said. "Temperature stabilizing. Fuel ratio, optimal." By the time she pressed the ignition button, the entire room had crowded around like witnesses at a resurrection. And then it happened. The engine roared to life. Not a cough, not a stutter. A smooth, powerful hum, a sound that shook the floor beneath them and filled the room with a mechanical heartbeat none of them had heard before. For the first time in 10 years, it was alive. Zariah turned to the engineers, those who had called her janitor, princess, vacuum girl, and said with quiet steel, "You just never listened." The fallout was immediate. Jennifer Walsh, the HR manager who'd written her up for approaching technical equipment, tried to sneak out of the lab. Rhodes stopped her at the door. "Miss Walsh," he said calmly, "we'll be needing a formal review of your handling of this situation. I believe you owe Miss Bennett more than an apology." She turned white. Elliot Granger was speechless. Bradley Chen looked like someone had poured cold water down his back. "Avery Lang?" He stepped into a corner and avoided eye contact altogether. And then came the one line that shattered the illusion of power once and for all. Rhodes looked at Zariah and asked, "Would you be open to a dinner meeting with some aerospace executives I know? They'd love to meet the person who fixed what no one else could." You could have heard a pin drop. She said yes. Confessed to a colleague over lunch, he said it plainly. "I thought my degree made me better. I thought knowledge had to come from a university. Now I work for someone who taught herself, and she's better than all of us." As for Amanda Foster, she never worked in marketing again. She applied for jobs across the country, every time a recruiter would find the video. That smile of hers, the way she laughed as Zariah was recorded without consent. One recruiter even told her, "You're not the kind of leadership we're looking for." She eventually took a job as a receptionist in a firm that didn't ask questions. Her MBA hung on the wall behind her, collecting dust. The final twist? Zariah began teaching, not at a university, on her own terms. She launched a free online course called The Art of Listening to Machines. The application page read, "Limited slots. Qualified professionals only." One of the rejected names? Bradley Chen. When Rhodes invited Zariah to dinner 6 months later, he raised a glass in her honor. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. "You reminded us all that wisdom doesn't come from status. It comes from respect, of machines, of people, of the truth." Zariah smiled, pulling from her pocket a small necklace. Inside it was a faded photo of Samuel Bennett, grinning in front of his old garage. She wore it every day. "He used to say," she told Rhodes, "that machines are like people. If you treat them with respect, they'll show you everything you need to know." The $50 million engine kept running perfectly for years after. And every time it hummed, it wasn't just a machine doing its job. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of Zariah.